like to first express my anumodana for the very friendly welcome, for the morning breakfast dana team, for all the people who come at noon to offer food, practice dana to the Sangha. We have got 2 monks here. It was also great to meet another monk friend who I came to know at my last visit in January of this year. And I'm very happy to see that numbers are increasing. Anumodana to all the devotees who dedicated a Saturday of their free time to join a one-day retreat. And that's something special, to be willing to get up so early and not to just relax in a worldly way, but to make the effort to purify one's mind on a one-day retreat. And good to see that these beautiful facilities are filling up again. And it is very beneficial to join the retreat because in busy modern life, the time to really calm down the mind and to develop in particular samadhi and more profound wisdom and insight, deeper understanding is not so easy, and the conditions in the retreat allow us to further deepen our practice. However, even if you don't go on one-day retreat, but maybe 10-day retreats, and if maybe you go on 3 10-day retreats a year, that's pretty good, in lay life. And you have family, you have children, job, and you still go to 3 10-day retreats a year, that would be pretty impressive. There would be 30 days. And how many days are there in the year? 365. So this is not even 10%. And if even someone manages to do that, 3 10-day retreats a year, it's not even 10% of the whole time in the year. So it will not be sufficient to only practice when we are on retreat. What is so important, what Luang Por Chah always emphasized, is that we have to practice consistently. And it's only a level of refinement that is changing. Now, for sure, in a retreat situation, one-day retreat, even more so, whole weekend retreat, still more 10-day retreat and longer, and we can reach more refined levels in our practice normally. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to practice at other times. And there's a big mistake, and we get kind of on the wrong track if we start dividing our life and our meditation. Now I'm on retreat, and here's my normal life. That will not work. But there has to become the one thing. Your life and your practice has to be one integrated whole thing. Not sure if you have heard of Luang Por Van, of what Doi Me Pang in the north of Thailand. When he passed away in the 1980s, he was probably the most famous Kuba Ajahn in Thailand. And once a group of lay people visited him. He didn't give that many teachings, but he was sometimes often happy to just answer questions, talk to people. And they asked him, Luang Por, how many hours of meditation should we do every day? And he didn't really give an answer, but he looked a little bit surprised. So they thought he hadn't understood their question, and they asked him again, Luang Por, we mean how many hours meditation a day? And he looked outright puzzled. And then the third time they tried, Luang Por, what do you think? What is a good amount of hours for us in lay life to practice? And you just say, all the time. Because he couldn't quite conceive of the idea that you divide your time between practice time and non-practice time. Now, for sure, everyone will acknowledge when you go to work, maybe tomorrow morning, and you arrive and you open your computer and you go through your emails, or you have to join the first meeting, that is probably not the time to attain fourth jhana. But it's still a time to practice. So what we need is some good instruction how we can practice all the time, including in lay life. Because the Buddha didn't teach only for monks and nuns. He did just as well teach for upasakas and upasikas. And if you think that only modern life is busy, it's very common already in the suttas that they talked with the Buddha and then they say, oh Bhante, we have to go now, we are very busy. It was just the same in many ways. So we need some instructions that are holistic, integrated, that refer to our whole life, not just to a retreat period, not just when we sit down on our meditation cushion in a formal posture, but instructions that refer to everything that involves your life, namely your job, namely your children, namely your other activities, shopping, looking after your family, your social activities, everything you do. Because this is where we have to practice, as Luang Por Wan pointed out, all the time. So do we have any such instructions? And one such instruction which I would suggest, the Buddha has given so many teachings, and sometimes you may feel a little bit overwhelmed if you look at just the Majjhima Nikaya, is already a lot. And then there's the Samyutta and the Anguttara and the Khuddaka and the long discourses and the hundreds and hundreds of suttas. And what instruction. One category which even in all Buddhist traditions is very well known, which the Buddha established right at his very first teaching, is the Four Noble Truths. You have all heard of that, isn't it? And what is the fourth Noble Truth? Ayameva Adiyo Attangiko Maggo. Namely, this noble eightfold path. Wide view, wide intention, wide communication, wide action, wide livelihood, wide effort, wide mindfulness, and wide samadhi. Now, this is a way how we can realize these Four Noble Truths. This is a practical instruction, how you practice to understand the Four Noble Truths. Now, this is what the Buddha called bhavana. And that is probably the best, the closest to what we often refer to in meditation, in Pali bhavana. It means the development. And the eightfold path is to be developed. Bhaveta panti me bhikkhave. As the Buddha said in that first discourse, this noble eightfold path has to be developed. That is a duty which is attached to that noble truth. This is a most practical one. This is something which gives you something to do. So my recommendation is let us focus on this one, even in your life. If you ever have any doubts, come back to these very fundamental teachings, the very first discourse, the very Four Noble Truths, which even in the other Buddhist traditions are well known and fully recognized as the teaching of the Buddha in Mahayana, even in Vajrayana. Everyone knows that. Even many non-Buddhists know it. So if we really want to practice, we should know it very well. Because if we develop that Noble Eightfold Path, this is the bhavana the Buddha intended. And when we go through it now, you will notice that it refers to everything in your life. Not just when you sit or when you're on a retreat. So what is this Noble Eightfold Path? The wide view goes ahead. Samma Ditti, number one. You could also translate it as wide understanding or wide conviction. Ditti can have different nuances in the English translation. All these three terms make sense. Wide view, wide understanding, wide conviction. For example, if you don't know the Noble Eightfold Path, you cannot practice it. At least the knowledge has to be there. What is the Noble Eightfold Path? But it's more than that. The way the Buddha explained wide view, it is the understanding, the conviction that there is a point in our action, that there is some result of our intentional actions, that there is what is called karma, that there is a rebirth, that there are different planes of existence, devas, humans, animals, ghosts, hell beings, and then the higher devas up to the Brahmaloka. Now there is that understanding, that conviction that these realms exist, and that when we die, it's not just nothing, it's not just over. What we call death is simply the separation of consciousness and of the mind from the physical body, from these four elements that constitute the physical body. And then it goes according to craving and our karma, and there's no reborn grasping on a new body unless all grasping and craving has been abandoned. So it continues, and where it continues, it depends on our karma, and depends whether we still have craving. Now, there is a point in respecting certain persons like our parents, because there is a debt of gratitude. Now, this is all included in wide understanding, wide view. There's a point in respecting teachers, even more so spiritual teachers. And of course, there's also the wide understanding of this Noble Eightfold Path. At the beginning, simply an intellectual, conceptual understanding, which later has to be deepened. The Buddha distinguished between worldly, wide understanding, which we can do with our intellect, which we can do with our faith and confidence in the Buddha, because we may not be able yet not to see other beings. We may not be able yet to remember our past lives. We cannot see how other people are reborn, so we take it on faith, on conviction, on confidence that the Buddha is correct and all the other great Kuba Ajahns and Arahants. But of course, as we progress in our practice, and hopefully later realize and experience the Dhamma, fully comprehend the Four Noble Truths, and then one will develop what is called super-mundane, wide understanding. And that is the wisdom faculty, the insight, the realization in the heart of the noble ones, in the heart of the liberated beings. And so this is how it all starts. Because even just conviction in the results of karma is so powerful. Even a really egoistic person will be a very good person if just they have conviction that karma works. Because if karma is true, if karma is real, and you're really concerned about your own welfare, even if you don't bother about other people, even someone who is really egoistic, as long as they're really convinced that karma works, they will do good things. because it means that it will come back to them as being happy and long-lived and healthy and having a good rebirth. So it's a very, very powerful effect if someone can be established in wide conviction, wide understanding. It's extremely difficult to turn a person around from being egoistic, and to some extent we all are a little bit egoistic, isn't it? And to completely abandon that and have total compassion for all beings, and it's very difficult. On the other hand, once you can convince someone that karma is real, that rebirth is real, just that much will be enough that they will make an effort to not harm others and to be good to other beings, even just for their own sake, for their own benefit, because it will all come back to them. And just knowing that much, understanding that much, and it will completely transform them. So we have to develop that conviction. How do we do that? By listening to people and associating with people who have that correct understanding. And this is why it's so important that you have this community, that you have these Dhamma teachings, that you make them available, that you provide opportunities that people can find what is called a kalyana mitta, a good friend, a beautiful friend, a Dhamma friend, someone who has got wide convictions. Because if you're surrounded by people who all have faith in the realization of the Buddha, who have faith that one can get out of this realm of old age, sickness, death and new birth and experience total freedom, if you're surrounded by people who share that understanding that karma is real, that rebirth is real, that there's a point in respecting parents and teachers and so on, it's quite natural that our own conviction will be strengthened. So Anumodana to everyone who's working to provide that kalyana mitta, to provide these teachings here. And it's so important to support people in developing right view, whether it's reading Dhamma books, whether it's reading the suttas, studying the Pali, reading the translations, whether it's listening on podcast, on YouTube to the teachers. Each time we do that, we strengthen what is called wide view. We develop at least our intellectual understanding that can gradually deepen until it becomes bhavana maya panya, understanding based on meditation. One thing which we also know, if we establish ourselves in wide understanding, is the next factor, samma sankappa. The Pali term sankappa actually covers a little bit both what we in English call intention or what we call thought. It has a little bit aspects of both. This is why you sometimes even find these translations. Usually it's translated as right intention, but you could also call it almost right thinking, right thought. They're quite close, and the Pali term has nuances of both. If I should opt for one intention, one translation, I would go for the right intention. And there are the three bad intentions, which are unbeneficial, which enmesh us further in samsara, which cause us to make bad karma, which cause trouble for us and others, which is what? Karma sankappa, vyapada sankappa, vihingsa sankappa. The intentions of sensuality, intentions of ill will, anger, and intentions of cruelty, enjoying to harm others. Number 2 and 3, most people immediately recognize, no, this is not good. Being angry, ill will, and delighting and hurting and harming others, being cruel. Most people recognize that. The first one is more tricky, because that can look quite nice and not so bad. Just enjoying nice food, enjoying life, as they say. And of course, it's not an outright evil like the other two, but the Buddha still put them under the wrong intentions, because even the most refined pleasures, and even if we do it within the 5 precepts, without really harming anyone, they mean that we increase our attachment to this world, and it's more difficult to get out. So what we have to develop instead are the 3 right intentions. Nekkhamma sankappa, abhyapada sankappa, avihingsa sankappa. Intention, thoughts of letting go. Intentions of non-harming, non-ill will, non-cruelty. Like, for example, loving kindness, like compassion, like gratitude, like equanimity, like respect to those who deserve respect. Now, these are all wholesome intentions. But in particular, the first one, letting go. Sometimes also translated thoughts of renunciation. Sounds a bit abstract, but we all know what letting go means. That whenever we can develop that. Now, sometimes people complain, I don't really have enough time to practice, because my life is so busy, Ajahn, how can I do all this practice? So if your life is so busy, that means you never get angry, is that correct? Because you're too busy to feel irritation, to have intentions of anger, irritation. You're saying your life is so busy, so that never happens because you're too busy to get irritated? Is that so? It's not so, no? Even if you're very busy, you still manage to have intention and thoughts of irritation or ill will, isn't it? Sometimes even more. When we're busy, we're more stressed out, and then one gets more easily irritated. Is your life too busy, or have intentions of sensuality? Craving for the next nice meal, craving for that car, for that new handbag, for that new iPhone, and so on? No, even if you're very busy, you manage to have all kinds of wishes and desires which you want to fulfill. So this is why I don't really accept the argument that you're too busy to practice. If you can still develop intentions and thoughts of desire, intention and thoughts of evil, irritation, and I think any honest person will admit that they do still have that, even if they're very busy, then there's obviously also time to do the opposite. And this is how we can practice throughout our life. And by having, first of all, some mindfulness. And we're jumping a little bit ahead now to factor number 7, the right mindfulness. Because we need this mindfulness to become aware what actually is our intention, what actually is our thinking. And then we need the first factor, we already talked about, right understanding. Because once we are mindful, there are thoughts of irritation. We also have to have the understanding that this is unbeneficial, this is unhelpful. And then we can make an effort. That is factor number 6, to develop the right intention instead. Now this is how we practice throughout the day. Developing, you can call that a form of the 3rd Satipatthana, the becoming aware of your mind state, becoming aware of your thoughts, your intentions. And then having the knowledge, the wide understanding, the which ones are the good ones, which ones are the bad ones. And the bad ones that we make an effort to abandon, or at least to weaken, or at least not to make them stronger. And the good ones that we make an effort to establish, to bring up, and to further cultivate. We can't have too much metta. We can't have too much compassion. We can't let go too much. We make these intentions strong. And do you have intentions, thoughts arising only when you're on retreat or only when you're sitting on a meditation cushion? No, it can happen when you're shopping, it can happen when you're working, when you're emailing, when you're in meetings, when you look after the kids. So whenever intentions, thoughts arise in our mind, that's when we can practice. By recognizing them, first of all, with mindfulness. By understanding, is that a good one or a bad one? Is that something beneficial and wholesome? Or is it maybe harmful for me and others? And then making the effort of abandoning the baddies and bringing in the goodies. And as we intend, as we think, so we end up speaking. And there's also, you can see, there's a development, the way the Buddha teaches. There's usually in a very systematic, going from coarse to refined, going gradually, step by step. And usually what we think repeatedly becomes a habit. What becomes a habit hardens into a character trait. What we think repeatedly tends to come out in speech, and then it becomes action. So that's why it's so helpful and important to catch it already at the level of thought intention. Now the next one, Samma Vacha. Now, literally that means that's the normal translation, the right speech. But in our time and age, what I experience, often a majority of our communication is actually not by speech, but by WhatsApp, Insta, Facebook, YouTube, mobile messages, SMS, email, and I don't know what all else. This is why I like to translate it as wide communication. This factor is not only concerned when you literally speak, but if you put something on your Insta, if you send a tweet, if you send an email, if you send an SMS, even if you update your profile picture on any social media, all of that is communication. And I think people do that quite a lot. So it's a very important area of practice. Because, again, the people say, I'm too busy, I don't have the time to practice. Does that mean you have no time to communicate? You never use social media? You never send SMS or email? You never use WhatsApp? You're never on Facebook because you're so busy? Amazing, now you have a lot of time to communicate. There's so much communication happening. And this is where we practice. When you communicate, you try to avoid, to reduce the miccha vacha, unbeneficial, bad, wrong, however you want to call it, unwholesome communication, and you establish the wholesome one. So what are the four bad forms of communication? Number one, of course, the lying. That is the one which is even included in the 5 precepts. because that is really the most harmful, the most important one. The lying is really harmful. And the Buddha never endorsed any form of lying. Have you ever heard the term white lie or polite lie? Is there anything like that in the Dhamma? No, this is an oxymoron. To misrepresent truth, to deliberately say something false and make another person, with the intention to make another person believe that, knowing that it's actually false, is never polite, it's never kind, it's never compassionate, it's never right communication. So the very first one, which is part of our 5 precepts, is that our communication has to be truthful. The genuine has to represent fact. Putting out fake news wouldn't be right communication. We have to be truthful. Can sometimes be tricky, no? If you put your profile photo through the Insta filter on maximum, is that already getting dishonest? It's a tricky one. I leave it to you to contemplate that. How much Photoshop is possible within the precept of truthfulness? How much manipulation of these things? Interesting question. When it comes to text, it's a little bit easier to decide. But photos can be quite misleading as well. It's getting more relevant with these deep fake videos now. That would obviously be a real form of lying if one publishes intentionally a deep fake video intending to deceive other people that this is real. So it's getting more and more important with all the difficulties to discern which news are actually the real news and the true ones, because what they call the fake news may be the real ones and vice versa, and we have the task of figuring that out. And of course a task to make sure that at least what we communicate is truthful. And if we don't know, if we're unsure, Adiyo tunhibavo, noble silence. That can be a safe fallback. Now remember, it's not always necessary to send a tweet. It's not always necessary to put that out at all. If it's just a rumor, if it's something which is potentially false, a wise person then will not put that out until they have reasonable certainty, beyond reasonable doubt, that this is actually truthful. So a very important area of our Dhamma practice nowadays, the truthful communication. But there are more factors. There's also that our communication should be kind, polite, the expression, how we say it, friendly, that it sounds friendly and not harsh, not offensive. Again, you can immediately see there's plenty of space for practicing. Often on the internet people have a handle, some fake name, so they're kind of anonymous. They're actually usually not anonymous really, but kind of, and it's quite amazing that once people feel that they are not known, that they make an anonymous post, how harsh and gross the speech can become. People would never act like that face to face. But when they put a comment under a YouTube video or somewhere else, they can get really extreme. So we have to be careful, even if we feel, oh, no one knows it's me writing that. And of course, we know ourselves. This whole argument, I do that because no one knows. Often the devas also know. Even the ghosts will know. But you may not mind so much. The devas know, and some Some Ajahn with psychic powers might know. But there's certainly at least one person who knows. That's you yourself and your conscience. And if our conscience knows we did something unwholesome, it's amazing how conscience functions. We do know that. It does register and it makes us feel down. It makes us feel the regret and remorse. It weighs on us. So much better not to do it. And if no other human seems to be aware, it's much better if we don't do it because we would know. But if there's nothing harmful we do at all, then our conscience knows that we are good, that we are not harming or hurting anyone. Then another very important one is divisive speech, divisive speech that is putting people up against each other. We can see that a lot of politics nowadays. Actually, I don't know so much about Malaysian politics, but in the US you can observe that very powerfully, that a lot of politics is dividing people and putting them up against each other. Rural against city, men against women, rich against poor, different races against each other, different religions against each other, different classes. The speech, the communication, the Buddha encouraged is communication that establishes harmony, that brings people together, that develops, cultivates the concord, so that those who are at loggerheads become less opposed, that those who are neutral become more friendly, that those who are friends already deepen their friendship, the communication that supports that. And again, just look at any of the social medias, the videos, YouTube and so on, how much is actually doing that and how much is the opposite, creating more rifts, divisions, anger and hatred between different groups. How much of the communication is doing the opposite and establishes friendship and harmony between individuals, between groups, between communities. So we have to make sure that our communication has that quality, bringing people together in harmony, reducing conflict, reducing opposition. And finally, we should avoid what the Buddha in Pali called sampapalapa. I'm not sure if you are all Pali scholars, but even if not, can you guess what is the meaning of the Pali term referring to speech communication? Sampapalapa. Blah, blah, blah. Meaningless speech, pointless speech. It's not really divisive, it's not really angry, it's not really evil, it's not really lying, but it's just blah, 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 blah. Here's a photo of the food I'm eating this evening, here's a photo of the shoes I just bought, here's a photo of me in front of a photo of him, and then here's a photo of all of us. And is that really helpful for the people who receive that? Is that really meaningful? Here's my comment on this comment of that person who commented on that video, which was a critique of that person saying this. Does it really help anyone to develop deeper understanding, to realize the Dhamma? Or even at least to live a more skillful worldly life, to achieve prosperity in their family, to have a good job? Does it lead to people to have more intelligence? What do you think? How much percentage on social media, YouTube and so on, how much percentage of that is sampapalapa? I leave it to you to guess the percentage. I have a feeling it's probably quite high percentage, isn't it? So we can extend this Pali term of Adiyo Tunibhavo, noble silence, also to social media silence. Do we really have to have 5 different channels to put it all out? Or, I don't know, maybe even more than 5. No? Email, WhatsApp, Insta, YouTube, and so on. Maybe more than 5 even. And do we have to check that every 5 minutes? Can we maybe check it only every 10 minutes? And then maybe, how long can you keep noble silence in regards to your social media and SMS and so on? When does the withdrawal symptoms kick in? As a good test. After an hour? After a day? Can you put your phone and all devices completely away for a week? Could you even survive that? That's a fascinating extension. The Sangha in the Buddha's time was well known for their incredible discipline that they would sit in pin-drop silence when the Buddha would speak for hours. The Buddha was so well known even among practitioners of other religions that he loved silence. But nowadays teenagers can be completely silent for hours and hours, glued to the screen, of course. They're not speaking. But it's actually not only teenagers. Facebook is the oldies now. And so everyone glued to the screen, they can be silent. But in terms of social media, silence is a very noble thing. Adiyo Tunibhavo, noble silence. We don't always have to put it out. An easy way of doing right speech often is simply not to communicate. So I today like to especially recommend that area for your practice in lay life. Because communication is so important and so frequent nowadays. And so many people spend a tremendous amount of time with that forms of communication. And each time you do that, you can develop bhavana by checking. Before you send out that photo, before you put up that post, before you make that comment, is it maybe just useless, pointless, some papalapa? Is it maybe divisive, or does it establish harmony? Does it have meaning? Does it help people to understand the Dhamma, or at least live a skillful worldly life, beneficial and helpful to other beings? Is it expressed in a friendly, polite manner? Usually in a friendly, polite communication is more effective anyhow. Have you ever achieved much by sending a really angry email? You shoot out this email where you really tell them what you think. And do they come back and say, oh yeah, you're so right, I'm really a really bad person and I totally agree with you? Does that usually work? How do you respond to really angry emails? It's usually more successful anyhow, to communicate in a polite, friendly, and most importantly, in a truthful. And that is really, really difficult. At least we have to make sure that what we put out is always truthful. And to figure out what exactly is all truth or half-truth or fake or half-fake and so on the internet, now this is really, really hard. But at least we should make sure what we put out should be really truthful. And so that gives you so much to practice through your life already. But of course, we continue with right action. And that is mostly the precepts, the 5 precepts, the other ones. And not to kill any living beings. Even an ant, even a mozzie. Not to intentionally kill any beings. not to steal, not to commit adultery or other forms of sensual misconduct, and not to take alcohol or other drugs that cause intoxication, heedlessness, that destroy the sense of shame and conscience, that weaken and eliminate mindfulness and awareness. That one is, I think, quite well known to most people, very important. Now, often the physical action can have a big impact, but we shouldn't underestimate the impact of speech, of communication. You never know whether that thing you put out goes viral, as they say, and is seen by maybe 1 million people. And if we put something out that really induces anger, division, if we put something out that is false in communication, and 1 million people see that, it can also be a huge, huge karmic impact. Never underestimate that. Now, when it comes to physical action, most people understand that I'm making karma here. But we have to be aware that we can make big karma by communication. Also wholesome communication. Now, if you share something, now it's not like I say that it's completely wrong to use these things, now they exist, and if you want to put something out, now let them know about the latest Bob's retreat. Now let them know about opportunities to help out and keep this place running, to serve on the exec committee, to do other jobs, to participate. If you communicate in such a way that many of your friends do some wholesome activity because you encourage them, you make heaps and heaps of good karma. It goes in both directions. So a skillful communication can give you heaps of good karma. Next one, Samma Ajivo, right livelihood. The more common way nowadays, you say your job. And you can see now how the Buddha was concerned about you in lay life. The one of 8 factors, and he made the job, the profession, your vocation. And why is that so important? Now imagine in your life how much time and energy is left after your job. Often the majority of your time and energy goes into your job, your profession. And if that profession is something really unwholesome, where other beings are harmed, where you can't even keep the precepts, how is your practice ever going to go right? When for the majority of your time and energy you are doing something unbeneficial. So it's really, really crucial that one recognizes that as an important, even essential part of your practice in lay life. And if you notice that your job forces you to break precepts, or that your job in some way is harming people rather than doing something beneficial, then it's important to start planning and gradually changing one's career. It may not always be possible to immediately change it, but usually if we plan long term, and ideally if you start when you end university, that is the best time, or already when you choose your university subject, to plan that you have a job where you do something beneficial and good, where you can keep the precepts, where you can actually do your job with an intention of loving kindness and a right intention to all beings. It doesn't have to be super heroic, even something very humble like a cleaner garbage collection. The benefit is obvious, is something good and beneficial, although it doesn't have a great reputation. some other jobs which are quite high status may actually harm many people, despite their high status and high income. So we have to choose the one which doesn't do that. No wide effort. We already talked about that. No? Mindfulness. Now we are moving more in what is called samadhi in the wider sense. Now we are moving away from external actions. Now we are moving into internal practice. Changing your thinking, changing your perception, changing your intention to make them wholesome. Now that's wide effort. Abandoning bad thoughts and intentions like anger. Establishing good thoughts and intentions like loving kindness, like compassion, respect, gratitude. Now this is where we can really put in big effort, because these things happen all the time in our mind. Now we discussed that already. So we have to sharpen our mindfulness, which is the next one, number 7. Because these internal ones is already difficult with communication. It's so easy for an email, a tweet, to slip out before you really know what you're doing. I know that in email you can have programs that delays the sending. So after you click send the email, you can put in another 30 seconds before it really goes out. Because sometimes you may notice after sending it, oh dear, I shouldn't. If you have that delay thing, you can still call it back, it's not yet out. But we have to develop the same thing for our thoughts. We have to carefully observe that we can control and call back, so to speak, the unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome intentions. But to do that, we first have to recognize it. So we have to develop mindfulness, at least in that sense, that we become aware of our thoughts, intentions. And we have to combine that with the right understanding, which ones are the good ones, which ones are the bad ones. And then the right effort, reducing the anger, increasing the loving kindness, reducing the desire, increasing the letting go. And the last one, samma samadhi, the jhana. And I admit this is a little bit difficult to do in daily life. I do admit that. It's unlikely when you're washing, shopping after finishing work that you will attain 4th jhana. I acknowledge that. So this is maybe a path factor which is more suitable to develop on retreat or when you're formally sitting meditation. I do acknowledge that one. But that still leaves 7 of 8 path factors which you can actually do throughout your life. And how you can make your Dhamma practice and your life, your meditation and your life, the one thing, one integrated whole of bhavana, of development. And let us maybe end here at that moment. Thanks for your patience.
Venerable Ajahn, can we have questions from the floor?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so.
Okay.
Hi Ajahn, thank you for the talk. I have a question about truthful speech. So I try to have skillful speech, and I find at times it's not skillful or safe to tell the whole truth, because the other person might take advantage of that information. So what I say is the truth, but I find there's also an intention to conceal or to deceive. So is the solution to change the intention?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And the precept on truthfulness doesn't mean that you always have to tell everything that is true. That would be almost cruel sometimes. And how could you possibly practice like that? Now, what you tell or generally communicate, that should be true. But you don't have to tell everything that is true. And sometimes it's actually skillful and beneficial to not do that. Yeah, that would be, I think, a misunderstanding. And that is not really an intention to deceive. It depends. There can also be instances where deliberately not telling something is a form of deception. It depends on the exact case. But again, using mindfulness and wisdom to figure out in your own mind, carefully observing, are you really trying to deceive someone there? Or are you just wisely holding back with something? There's even these instances where the Buddha has asked things. For example, once one of these soldiers, a mercenary, who has heard from his teachers that if a soldier dies in battle and fighting bravely, that he will go to the brave devas. And when he asks the Buddha whether that is true, the Buddha just says, no, please don't ask me that. So even the Buddha wants to hold back because he realizes that if this person now gets that, it will be very difficult for him. So he is asking 3 times, and only then the Buddha tells him that the normal result of slaughtering people in battle will be that you have a rebirth in hell or in the subhuman realms. That is a tendency, not to go to Devaloka. But even the Buddha first was holding that back. And quite a few Kuba Ajahns, even Ajahn Man, in the beginning when he had these psychic powers, there's this story how he saw one monk doing quite a few unskillful things and not keeping the rules, and he just confronted him and told him straight, and it just didn't have good results. Because sometimes people can't take the truth, and if you do that too directly and right into their face, that may be counterproductive. So thank you for that question. The rule about truthfulness, the precept, that doesn't require that you say everything. And if your friend comes back from the hairdresser and it's a total disaster, and she asks, oh, how do you like my new hairdo? It doesn't mean that you have to say, no, it's a total disaster. You can say, for example, it's amazing. It's not a line, it's quite amazingly disastrous. So you have to be a little bit skillful, you don't always have to tell the full truth.
I have another question, Ajahn. You mentioned about parents being, like, we owe a debt of gratitude, like they are karmic debtors. Can you expand on that a bit more? Because I find, for example, in situations where there's like emotional abuse or some form of abuse, like it's very difficult to have that respect for parents. But I also like try to reflect that they are special beings because we have this karmic debt and connection with them. So,
unfortunately, that happens also, and of course, that kind of is a little bit different situation. It mostly refers to cases the parents may not be perfect. And even the most well-meaning and good parents may occasionally make mistakes, and the child may be hurt in their feelings and quite upset and so on. And sometimes there are good reason for them to be upset. But what the Buddha refers to, that even the very body we have comes from the parents already. Just having this physical body genetically, and then the food and. Even a mother who later has done something to traumatize the child, she still carried the child through pregnancy. She went through all the pain of labor and childbirth. She went through all the pain of feeding. And if you talk to people who have a newborn, after a couple of weeks, they look pretty wiped out because they can hardly sleep. And so on. We learned everything from our parents, which we take for granted, that we can walk, that we can dress, that we know how to eat, how we speak. So in the case of abuse, then obviously you have got these mixed where you also have things which we obviously wouldn't feel grateful for. We wouldn't feel grateful for abuse. The Buddha wouldn't request that. But hopefully, even in that case, of course, first of all, the child has to get out of that situation, and then even a separation may be necessary to protect the child from the abuse. But later, when that separation has been achieved, psychologically, it probably would be helpful if the child also could acknowledge if there's any good from the parents, if that can still be found, because that will hopefully weaken the trauma a bit. Without denying the trauma, without denying that this was then evil and unwholesome from the parents, but to hopefully also being able to acknowledge some of the goodness.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the enlightening talk. I would like to know more about the issue of conscience.
Conscience, yeah.
Yeah, is every human being have conscience? And I would also like to know if those that do not have, is there any way to help them to develop conscience?
Yeah, ultimately, everything can be developed. Everything is conditioned. And I would agree that every human being has what we call conscience, but in some it can be very weak. And it's known as one feature of what is called psychopathy, that they have that to an extremely low extent. This is why lie detectors don't really work. They work on most people, and most people will not be able to fully treat that. But there are people who have absolutely no shame in lying, and so they don't have any stress reaction when they lie. They can just lie through their teeth without their body temperature, their electric tension in the skin and so on, and none of these things will respond because they're lacking, or rather their conscience is very, very weak. When you say that you would like to know more about it, now one thing I would recommend, investigate it in your own mind. Because it's something that you can encounter directly, not just something that can be talked about, but it's a faculty operating in your own mind. And it's very helpful to mindfully look at that. This is how you can learn a lot about it. In terms of developing it, the Buddha strongly encourages it. He usually puts it as the most basic condition in a long chain of wholesome phenomena. It's called Uttama, often translated as moral shame and moral fear or something like that. I like to translate it as shame and conscience. Uttama, I like to translate as shame and conscience. And the Buddha very strongly encourages that quality. It was even what he encouraged Venerable Ma Kassapa after he had ordained him, one of the greatest disciples, probably the number 4 disciple of the Buddha. And that was his first instruction, to really sharpen that. So we certainly can develop and strengthen our shame and conscience by deliberately bringing up the conditions that lead to an increase in these qualities. One thing which I sometimes do, I'm not sure if you have heard of Lumpur Tui. He's one of the most senior Ajahns, well-known meditation masters in the Dhamma-inspired tradition now. I had the good fortune of having had personal contact with him. And sometimes if I'm not quite sure how I should act in a certain situation, I imagine what would Lumpur Tui say if he saw me now as a monk. And if I do that, that strengthens my sense of shame and conscience. To imagine that this teacher I really respect, what would he say or comment on what I'm doing now? This is just one little technique, how you can strengthen that. You imagine someone you really highly respect for their knowledge and Dhamma progress, and imagine that what you're wanting to say or communicate or do now would be known to him. How would you think about that? How would you feel telling them that? I think that can be skillful for, helpful for strengthening shame and conscience. As for other people, it's always more difficult to teach others. But pointing out the harmful effects of bad actions, and anything which you hear in Dhamma talks can be helpful there. Even just pointing out these qualities and how they are beneficial and good. But it's very difficult with people who have very little, because it's the most fundamental. The Buddha said someone who is completely lacking, who doesn't really have this shame and conscience, they can't really grow in other Dhamma qualities. So it's also important to establish it in kids. This is where usually the condition is the easiest. So it's very helpful to develop in a child, to support them developing the shame and conscience.
Thank you, Bhante. Since we are on the topic of lying, say the person who lies may not have the conscience or may not be aware of its own actions, but what are the psychological effects on the person who he lied to, the person who has received, taken, felt the lie? What are the psychological effects, and what are the remedies for it? Thank you, Bhante.
If someone is not aware that they are lying, then it is usually not considered lying, really. Now, one of the factors for a true lie is that you actually know it is false, and then still deliberately go ahead. In terms of the effect on the other person, it may not make that much of a difference. If you later find out that the person did that unintentionally, then you may feel less disappointed and less harmed and less upset. But sometimes you may not even find out, and then there's no real difference for the other person. But it's a big difference for the person giving that wrong information, because the bad karma comes from intentionally doing that. However, if someone spreads big lies without knowing that, that usually indicates that delusion is strong in that person, the ignorance delusion. And that is also karmically very bad. So they're not getting the karma for lying so much, but they're still in big trouble, because if you're really lying without noticing it, there must be some delusion or something, else you should be able to notice it. In terms of the effect of the other person, sometimes it may not really make any difference. However, if they come to know that it was an unintentional lie, they genuinely thought it's true, or they just put something out without much thinking or something like that, then usually you feel less disappointed at least. Although the harm in the end, the physical harm, may be the same. But very important to understand that to count as a real lie, it must be intentional. And it must be with awareness that it's wrong. If you mix up someone's phone number, someone asks you for a phone number, and you give them a wrong number because you just mix that up, it's obviously not any bad karma. It was just a lapse of mindfulness. If you give someone the wrong phone number because you don't want these two people to be close, well, this is a real lie and it's bad karma. So it's a big difference. But you're quite right, now for the other party it may not necessarily be a big difference. I may sometimes be more upset if someone lied to me just out of real delusion than someone doing it intentionally out of evil, because I find delusion very upsetting. And it's an important point you raise, because a lot of the fake stuff comes actually from delusion. People are not necessarily putting out the fake stuff And a fake can be in a very, very famous and highly respected people. Sometimes the fact checkers can be the fake stuff. It's not like you can always rely that the fact checkers are actually right. Sometimes they may put out the delusion. And a lot of that stuff is actually not really out of evil misrepresentation, but because so many people are deluded and believe the wrong things already. Of course, a better response than being upset about them would be to have compassion. Because delusion is the worst of all defilements. Anger is usually a strong karmic effect, easily bad karma, but it's easy to abandon because anger feels so unpleasant, so people usually don't like to be angry. Sensuality is not necessarily so much bad karma if you keep it in the 5 precepts, but it's very difficult to abandon sensuality because it can feel so nice. But delusion is the worst because it has serious karmic effects and it's really difficult to abandon because you don't even know you're deluded. They may think they know right and they may be blaming the others to spreading fake news. And they may be accusing others to be liars, and in reality they're deluded themselves and what they put out is false themselves. That's out of delusion. The ideal response is compassion because these people, it's very difficult for them to get out of that. The intentional liar is actually easier and they can change their ways. The person who is just spreading all kind of nonsense out of deep delusion, how can they possibly get out of that? Really, really difficult.
Thank you, Venerable Ajahn Dhammasiha, for sharing with us the invaluable teachings of the Buddha. Brothers and sisters in the Dhamma, shall we express our gratitude and appreciation once again by saying sadhu sadhu 3 times together. Sadhu.